Untrodden Peaks and Unfrequented Valleys, Section 31. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Untrodden Peaks and Unfrequented Valleys, A Midsummer Ramble Through the Dolomites, by Amelia B. Edwards. Chapter 13. Forno di Zoldo and Zoppe, Part 1. There remained yet another important excursion to be taken from Caprile before we could finally break up our camp and depart. We must go over the pass of Alleghe, visit the Val di Zoldo, make a pilgrimage to a certain village called Zoppe, where a Titian was to be seen, and come home by way of the Val Fiorentino. Now the main attractions of this expedition did not appear upon the surface. We had been over a good many passes already, and through a good many valleys, and had been plentifully pelted with Titians of all degrees of genuineness. But what we really wanted was to see the back of the Civita, and to get a near view of the Pelmo. As both of these ends would be answered by following the route thus laid down, and as the expedition was guaranteed not to exceed 3 days, we once more packed our black bags, stocked the luncheon basket, rose at daybreak one fine morning, and departed. This time young Cesare Pezze, the ex-Garibaldian, having a married sister living at Pieve di Zoldo, whom he wished to see, volunteered to walk with us, a soldierly, upright, picturesque fellow, with his coat flung loosely across one shoulder, a yellow silk handkerchief tied cornerwise round his throat, a bunch of carnations in his hat, and an alpenstock in his hand. This time, as last time, our way lies at first beside the lake, but strikes away presently behind the village of Alleghe, and up a delicious little valley, thick with walnuts and limes, and threaded by a bright torrent, that fills many a moss-grown water-trough, and turns many an old brown wheel. The path, rising and winding continually, passes farmlands and farmhouses, barns, orchards, gardens, green slopes striped with rows of yellow flax laid down to bleach in the sun, and terrace after terrace of wheat, barley, flax, hemp, potatoes, and glossy-leafed, tassel-blossomed Indian corn. And as the path rises, so also rises the Civita, its lower precipices detaching themselves in grand proportions from the main mass, while every riven pinnacle, spire, obelisk, and needle-point stands out sharply against the deep blue sky. Thus the mountain grows in grandeur with every upward foot of the way. White patches that looked like snowdrifts from the valley now show as glaciers coated with snow, through which the blue ice glitters, and by, as we draw still nearer, another of those strange circular holes, or occhi as they are here called, stares down at us from near the top of a small peak, like a hole drilled in a dagger blade. So, with exquisite glimpses over the bluish-green lake, we emerge at length from the gorge, and climb a steep, stony lane with never a tree on either side to screen off the burning sun. Suddenly a long, steel-blue snake, speckled with white, darts out from under the very feet of White Nessol. Clementi utters a wild war-whoop, L. a scream, the mule a snort of terror. Giuseppe and young Pezzi leap forward with their sticks, and in a second the poor reptile, which is as thick as one's wrist and about 4 feet in length, but I believe quite harmless, lies dead by the wayside. The stony path now leads out upon a wild and desolate mule track skirting the grim flanks of Monte Fernazza, a gruesome mountain whose low black precipices have crashed down before now in many a bergfall, covering the barren slopes with shattered debris, and huge purply blocks all blistered over with poisonous-looking lichens. Winding now round the head of the glen by which we have come up from Alleghe, we arrive at last upon a grassy plateau at the foot of an overhanging cliff which, though locally called the Monte Coldai, is in truth the huge northeastern shoulder of the Civita. Above here, in a hollow among the rocks, nestles a small tarn called the Lago Caldi, said to command a fine view, but which we had not time to climb to. Beyond Monte Coldai, the way lies up a fine rock-strewn gorge, just like the gorge of the Avisio, where it leads up to the Fedaja Alp. Gradually we lose sight of the long, fretted façade of the Civita, which retires behind the Cordai rocks, and looking back find that the lake has sunk quite out of sight. The Sasso Bianco, which till now had been standing out against the sky, has all at once dropped below the horizon, and is immeasurably overtopped by the towering altitudes of the Marmolata. The Boe, the Cima di Pape, the Monte Vernale, the Sasso di Valfreda, and many another now familiar peak have also risen into view. But it is the Marmolata that claims all one's attention, and seems to fill the scene. Presently an obstinate cloud that has been clinging to the highest point of the summit clears off little by little, and leaves the whole noble mass distinctly relieved against the western sky. "Guardate," says young Pezzé, seeing a sketch in preparation, "La Marmolata has thrown her veil aside to have her portrait taken." It is a grand view of the mountain, even though its snows and glaciers are all out of sight. From here, as from the Sassi Bianco, one sees its true form and its actual summit, while of the one no idea can be formed, and of the other no vestige is visible from either the Tre Sassi or the Fedaja. Clementi can even identify the tiny topmost patch of snow on which FFT placed his barometer when he reached the summit. And now a grassy col, about a quarter of an hour ahead, is pointed out as the summit of the pass. There we shall see the mountains of Val di Zoldo, and take our midday rest in whatever shady spot we can find. There, too, as young Pezzé pleasantly prophesies, we shall be within reach of a chalet where milk and even cream may be purchased. So we press on eagerly, but stopping suddenly a little below the top, are amazed to see the Pelmo, snow-ridged, battlemented, stupendous, chewed up all at once, as it seems, from behind the slopes and fir-woods to the left of the pass, as near to us as the Civita. Large masses of vapour are rising and falling round those mighty towers, never leaving them wholly uncovered for an instant, but they look all the mightier for that touch of mystery. And now, a few yards higher, and the Marmolata, the Sasso Bianco, and the Boe, and all the rest disappear altogether, and a lovely grassy plain dotted over with strewn rocks and clumps of firs, and bounded by a line of mountain peaks as wild and fantastic as anything we have yet seen, lies spread out in sunshine before us. This, according to the map, must be the grand chain of which the Monte Promper and Monte Piesedel, both as yet unascended, are the dominating summits. Up here we encamp for an hour and a half, sub Jove, and the mules graze while we take luncheon. Clementi vanishes up the hillside, and returns by and by with a bowl of cream in each hand, which, beaten up with wine and sugar, and eaten in the midst of such a scene, is at least as delicious as the dulcet creams prepared by Eve for the angels' entertainment. Meanwhile the cowherd comes down from the chalet to stare at the forest dairy, and is so overpaid with half a lira that I begin to fear we must have given him a piece of gold by mistake. A deep, narrow gorge now leads down from a little below the summit of the pass to a point whence the Val di Zoldo, sunny, cultivated, sparkling with villages and spires, opens out far and wide beneath our feet. And now, at last, we see the back of the Civita. Accustomed as one has become to the strangely different aspects under which a Dolomite is capable of presenting itself from opposite points of the compass, here is a metamorphosis which the most erratic imagination could never have foreseen. To say that the Civita is unrecognizable from the Zoldo side is to say nothing, for the mountain is so strangely unlike itself that, although one has, so to say, but just turned the corner of it, the discrepancy in form, in character, and apparently also in extent, is almost past acceptance. Calm, perpendicular, majestic on the side of Alleghe, here it is wild, tossed, tormented, and irregular. From Alleghe it appears as a vast, upright, symmetrical screen. Here it consists of a long succession of huge, straggling buttresses divided by wild glens, the birthplaces of mists and torrents. If from Caprile the mountain looks, as I have said more than once, like a mighty organ, from here it seems as if each vertical pipe in that organ front were but the narrow end of rock, in which each of these buttresses terminates. Looking at them thus in lateral perspective, I can compare them, wild and savage as they are, to nothing, save that vista of exquisitely carved and decorated flying buttresses just below the roof of Milan Cathedral, which is known as the Giardino Botanico. The Civita was first ascended by Mr. F.F. Tuckett, who gives the height at about 10,440 feet. The summit, snow-crowned and lonely, is plainly seen from this side, and looks as if it might be reached without serious difficulty. The valley of Zoldo is richly cultivated, the farmhouses are solidly built, and the whole district wears a face of smiling prosperity. The usual little dusty hamlets with the usual religious frescoes on the principal house fronts, the usual little white church, and the usual village fountain, follow one another rather more thickly than in most other valleys. At San Nicolo, where the valley narrows and the rocks close in upon the rushing Mai far below, we enter upon an excellent carriage road, which goes from this point, by an immense détour, to Longarone. At a certain village called Dante, some way below San Nicolo, we had proposed to pass the night, but being daunted by the dirt and general disorder of the inn, push on for Forno di Zoldo, where Ball's guide reports comfortable quarters at Cercena's inn. Here we arrive at the end of another 3/4 of an hour, and alight at the door of a very large, very old, and very dirty-looking house up a small steep street in the heart of the village. Passing through a gloomy stone kitchen where some 15 or 20 harvesters are eating polenta out of wooden platters, we are shown up a dark staircase and into a large room, the floor of which is encrusted with the filth of centuries. The sofa, the chairs, the window curtains look as if dropping to pieces with age, and only held together by cobwebs. The windows open on a steep side lane where all the children in the place presently congregate, for no other purpose than to flatten their noses against the panes and stare at us, till candles are brought and curtains can be drawn to exclude them. As for the landing, which in most other Tyrolean inns is the cleanest and smartest place in the house, it is the dreariest wilderness of old furniture, old presses, old saddles and harnesses, sacks, undressed skins, and dusty lumber of all kinds that was ever seen or heard of outside the land of the dawn. Yet the Cercenas themselves are well-mannered, superior people, and their forefathers have owned estates in Val di Zoldo for over 500 years. The daughter-in-law of the house, a pretty, refined-looking young woman, waits upon us, and is made quite wretched by our few and modest requirements. We are not, I think, unreasonable travellers, but we have been riding and walking for nearly 12 hours, and wish not unnaturally for water, towels, food, and coffee. For all these things we have to wait interminably. That we should require a tablecloth is a serious affliction, and that we cannot sup like the haymakers off polenta is almost more than young Signora Cercena knows how to bear. A few small lumps of smoke-blackened meat, a dish of unwashed salad, and some greasy fritters are at length brought, and this young lady, while professing, I imagine, to wait at table, walks over quite coolly to a looking-glass at the farther end of the room, and there deliberately tries on L.'s hat and all my rings and bracelets. It is a dreadful supper, and is followed by a dreadful night, hot and close and wakeful, and enlivened in a way that has associated Forno di Zoldo for ever in my mind with that Arab proverb which describes Malaga as a city where fleas are always dancing to the tunes played by the mosquitoes. End of section 31.